Thank you very much. My name is Tim Salzman, and I forgot my tuck shirt. But I have a long-suffering wife, and many of you have been through this, and she's driving madly here, so soon I'll look representable. It has been 24 years since I came to town, and 25 years since Gerard Schwarz assumed the music directorship of the Seattle Symphony. And in that time, his legacy really extends beyond the obvious growth of the orchestra, the Grammy Awards, the nominations, the incredible amount of new music that they have taken up, both in terms of commissioning and performing, and the beautiful hall that you sat in yesterday, which without his incredible community spirit and affable personality just simply wouldn't be there. But he's proven to be an unbelievable friend to music education, as you're witnessing at this conference. I sort of had in mind what I wanted to ask him to do here, and of course I approached him with some, not really trepidation, because he's not that kind of a person, but I just remember New York, and I remember what happened, some of you, with Lauren Maisel and Gunther Schuller and whatnot. But as has always been the case with him, you know, I asked him this and that, and he just kept saying yes, and he said, people always say, how did you get him to do that? And it's because you ask him. Lately, he's been conducting like the All Northwest MENC Orchestra and the Washington All-State Orchestra. Name a major orchestra conductor in this country that does that. So I certainly won't take up any more time. But just on behalf of CBDNA, I don't think there's any way we can thank him enough. So would you please welcome Gerard Schwarz to the stage?
Thank you all. Thanks very much. Thanks very much. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. I was thinking about something today as I got a list of questions from Cliff and Carolyn that I'll answer, and then I'll answer any questions that any of you may have. But there was something that struck me very much in the last few days, and I thought I would share it with you. For all of you, it may be very obvious, but for me, it wasn't so obvious. So I haven't, unfortunately, because of my schedule this week, been able to go to a lot of events, but obviously I heard the wonderful ensemble from the Kansas City Conservatory do the Dvorak yesterday so beautifully. And then I went to the Central Washington University concert yesterday afternoon, which was exquisite, as I'm sure every other concert has been and will continue to be during the convention. What struck me, of course, is the high level of performance, naturally, but something else which all of you know, and many of us, or most of us in my world, don't know. When we talk about cultural life in a city, here in Seattle, for example, we talk about the symphony, we talk about the opera, we talk about the ballet, we talk about the art museum, we talk about the theaters. When we talk about the great medical care here, we talk about the great hospitals and the medical centers and the medical school here at the university. When we talk about education, we talk about so many of the wonderful universities and colleges that are in our region. But what we don't do is talk about the universities as part of cultural life in the community. And when you think about cultural life in a city like ours here, or any of yours, wherever you're from, the university plays an important role, not just in presenting, because most of you we have presenting here, chamber music and dance and so forth, but actually to hear these incredible wind ensembles play and bands is just staggering, and it adds so much to cultural life. So from now on, whenever I talk about the great atmosphere of the arts in our city here in Seattle, or our region in the Northwest, I will always include the tremendous contributions our universities make. And it's interesting, because we are, yes, of course, educators, you're teaching these young musicians about music. Some of them will become musicians, others not. Some will become educators, some will become, who knows, doctors, lawyers, whatever. But in fact, they become part of the fabric of life in cultural life in this community or in your communities, and especially where wind ensembles and bands are concerned, because We don't have, with the exception of the armed forces, and maybe there are some exceptions, there aren't any really professional wind ensembles in the sense that there are professional symphony orchestras. So to hear this wonderful music being played, we really have to rely on the universities to do it. And for those of us that care deeply about contemporary music and care deeply about American music, nothing is more gratifying than to go to a band concert where inevitably you hear almost all contemporary music. You hear almost all American music, not necessarily all. I mean, obviously, you play a piece of Percy Grainger, who, even though he was born in Melbourne, really was an American citizen, lived in Westchester, just so everybody knows, and as I'm sure you do, and Gustav Holst and so forth. But the reality is that it's a miracle to hear these pieces. I mean, for me to hear my teacher, Vincent Persichetti's Symphony yesterday was a real thrill. I remember I studied with Paul Creston, and he would always talk to me about how great the university bands were and how great the performances were that he got from writing for band, and how much he loved it. And so I commend you all, those of you that have ensembles playing here, but everyone that represents high art in such a remarkable way at your universities. It's really quite something. It's humbling, actually, and it's something that we in the symphonic world should not only respect, we should talk about, and we should herald what all of you do, as I will from now on when I talk about cultural life in our city. So I'm going to go right to some questions that Cliff and Carolyn had emailed me, the ones that I think are most pertinent. So one was, so we have a concert tonight. How do we come about doing this concert? Well, this has been an interesting week for me this week because, as all of you know, Alan Hovhannes' 100th anniversary, the 100th anniversary of his birth, March 8th, happened this month. And he lived here for many years, and we decided, I can really say I decided, I apologize for that. I decided that I really wanted to honor him and his contribution in some way. It's a very interesting voice, as we all know. It's different than any other voice. It's not like any other composer with the Armenian influence, the Japanese influence, the Chinese influence, the Korean influence, the influence of nature especially, whether it's be whales or mountains. I mean, it's really quite extraordinary to see what he's done. He's touched so many people. There are so many real avid Hovhannes lovers all over the world. And when I proposed this, of course, the management of the orchestra said, I can't do it. It's out of the question. No one will come. I won't sell any tickets. Forget it. That's what we conductors usually face when we try to make interesting programs. So my compromise was to bring my dear friend Lynn Harrell to come and play 2 concertos. So it became a Lynn Harrell festival and a Hovhannes festival. So it became a Hovhannes first half, Dvorak concerto, Hovhannes first half, Elgar concerto tonight. But then something else happened that was really quite wonderful. As most of you probably know, I commissioned 18 works this year to celebrate my final season as music director. This was a really interesting project. My wife Jody and I really wanted to represent something special in my last year here, and nothing is more special for me than to do new works by my old friends. And when I say my old friends, what I mean to say is that even though some of the composers are not as old as Gunther is, who's 85, they're all composers whose music I've played regularly and composers I know very well over many years, rather than the young composers I think a lot of. So I took the 18 composers that I have a long-term relationship with, who I care about, and asked them each to write a short work for my final season. As you would expect, the symphony management didn't want to do this, and they nixed the idea as well. And so this is what we symphony conductors have to suffer through, and I'm not supposed to tell you all this, but since this is my last year, I'll tell you anything. It doesn't really matter. And so I persisted. In fact, Jody and I said, just to make sure, we would pay for it if necessary. And then there was a little change of management. A new executive director came. He said, go for it. We went for it. What was interesting about that, and it's something that we should always all remember, if you do not do anything of artistic significance and importance, you will never get support. If you do nothing, nothing will happen. You know, it's that old adage, you try 10 things and you succeed 8 times, that's great. If you're afraid to try anything, you're guaranteed to fail period. So we actually raised about $60,000 more than the commission's cost, even though we started with nothing except Jody's and my guarantee. So this week we had 2. Next week we have 2. And it's winding down. So Chen Yi was on Thursday night. Now, Chen Yi worked out perfectly. It's a wonderful piece. I know you guys probably were otherwise engaged, but and we heard a band piece of hers yesterday, but it was perfect for Alan's music. It just fit in like a glove, and I feel like I'm getting the best 5 minutes of every composer. Even though Joe Schwander wrote a 15-minute piece, everyone else wrote shorter works. And then George Stantakis. This has been really fun for me. George, an old friend, and I think an absolutely wonderful composer. One of the questions was to talk about that. So what's interesting about George is really, really picky. I don't know if any of you know him, but I remember the first time I did a piece of his, he was very happy with the rehearsal. He said, "Could we go through the tape?" I said, "Oh, sure." This is cassette days, So we went to my house, our house downtown. And he stops after the first bar. He says, "Oh, could you do a little stretching on the 3rd beat?" "Oh, sure." And he stops on the 4th bar. I mean, I'm not exaggerating, but this may not be the right bar. He said, "Could you go a little faster on the 4th bar, a little faster?" "Oh, yeah, sure." Then the 6th bar, "Could you maybe make a little more crescendo in that one than you did, And it went on like that for about 10 bars. And then I said the obvious thing that all of you will appreciate. I said, "George, I love you. You conduct the piece." And he intelligently said, "No, I'd rather you do it." And then I said, "Well, then you have to let me do it." And so George, unfortunately or fortunately, wasn't here this week. So I sent him. I sent him. It was a cute thing. I sent him from a rehearsal. I sent him the MP3 so he could listen to it. And he writes back, "I marked it at 104. You did it at 108. What am I, a metronome? And but then at bar 27, you went to 112. I said, "Oh God, what did I do? How horrible!" And then where it says, clarion-like, it was at 114. But then you went back to 110. This is his comments. So then after all of this analysis of the tempos that I used, he said, "Maybe it's best if you start at 112. Because that was good. I'll change my mark from 104 to 112. That'll be good. And then when it comes to the place that says agitato, don't change the tempo." This is just wild. So I'm thrilled about George's piece tonight. For those of you that'll hear it, it's, I think, fantastic. But it's also been a very amusing experience dealing with my dear friend. A couple of the questions had to do with how do I approach the wind ensemble. Well, as you know Tim Salzman. Tim is fantastic, and I've collaborated with most of the universities, not all the universities in our region, but especially here at the University of Washington. And when we were doing an American Music Festival a few years ago, Tim did a whole concert of American music. Of course, that was pretty simple for him because he had so much music that he was doing that fit right in. I'm a great believer in the community of music making. It's not the symphony, but it's a symphony, and it's a university, and it's the youth symphony, and it's the semi-professional orchestras, the amateur orchestra, the volunteer choruses. It's the kids' choirs. So what I do here is I bring us all together as often as I can. So I was very thrilled to be able to do a piece of Alan's tonight. I picked this piece rather than the one we did on Thursday because it has 6 trumpets, 6 trombones, 6 horns, 6 clarinets. And if I would have proposed that on a symphony program, I would have been told, "Oh, I can't do it because it costs too much money, too many extras." So the University of Washington is saving the symphony, $20,000 this week. It's very nice of them. And then and one of the questions was, how do I approach it in any way differently than working with the symphony players? I don't approach it at all differently. I do it exactly the same. Exactly. The level was incredibly high. No issues. I just did what I always do, and that's what I do with all youth orchestras that I have been privileged to conduct. I treat them like professionals, and maybe sometimes I have to work a little slower on things, not in this case, but I always treat everyone exactly the same, and it always works, I think, exceptionally well. Let me just go here. How does working with a band different from working with an orchestra? In an orchestra, because we have so few wind players, comparatively, you try to get the best solo players you can. Solo oboe, solo flute, solo clarinet, solo trumpet, solo horn. You get the greatest players you can. You expect them to help you get the greatest section you possibly can do. Okay, we do a lot of tuning, we do a lot of balancing, but basically, as a symphony conductor, you work mostly with the strings. The biggest difference, obviously, is you're working with this, because it's the unanimity of approach with the string section that's important. The bow speed, the bow distribution, what fingerings we use, what string we play on. Do we do a slide? Don't we do a slide? You know, you can't work 100% as meticulously as you want because of the schedules, but most of the time, we play with a great unanimity of sound, intonation, ensemble, and so forth. And so as a symphony conductor, you really do end up working mostly with the string section. The question about preparation, consistency or spontaneity. I believe in consistency. If I do a piece at 20 minutes, if I do 4 or 5 performances, they'll vary within seconds. Because the players, whether they're string players dealing with bow distribution and bow speed and all that, or wind players dealing with air, need to be able to rely on a certain tempo. You know, you do it at a certain speed, they know how much they have to practice technically, they know how much air they have, how much bow they have. I believe in that. And so I'm meticulous as much as I can be in rehearsals. But at concerts, I try to be spontaneous, and so things will be a little different. Not a lot different, but enough, hopefully, to make the music even more vibrant and come even more alive. So the spontaneity comes more after the hard work of having everything really as well prepared as possible. Everybody knows exactly what is expected, what's coming next, and then you can feel free to do whatever you do. Then there's some questions about doubling. You know, for us, I like doublings in the orchestra because we have large string sections, much larger than certainly a lot of orchestras in certain places. Sibelius had his 5th symphony. He's conducting 8 first violins. Sibelius symphonies need a lot of doubling at times. You find the same thing true in Brahms, where the string sections were smaller. Wind players don't like doubling. They often think that you do it for volume, but you all, as involved with wind ensembles and bands, know that that's not true. You hear any good band, and it's a quality, it's not a volume. Yes, you get 6 guys playing, it's louder than 3 guys possibly, but if you get the blend of sound with, let's say, 6 trumpets, it can be more beautiful than a blend with 3. I guess I pretty much answered the questions that I got, and so since my time is about up, I thought if there are any questions anyone has, if you can yell them at me, I'd be very happy to answer anything. Just stand up and we have a conductor here going out to help you. Anything anyone would like to know? What's next? That's a good one. What's interesting, as you know, in my life, I've been here 28 years, music director for 26 years, and I spent a lot of weeks here. I've always done that. I've done a lot of recording here, continue to do that throughout this year, a lot of new music festivals and so forth. So what you probably don't know is I'm a composer, and I've composed a lot, and actually lately of great success, and so I'm composing a lot more. I have 4 big commissions coming up, which I have to finish. I am, of course, conductor laureate here, and I'll do 4 or 5 weeks every year, including an American Music Festival again next year. I do a lot of guest conducting. But my biggest project now, and it's what I'm devoting most of my time to, is the All-Star Orchestra. Briefly, this is an orchestra that I've put together from all the major orchestras in the country, which comes together at the end of August in New York, and we film 8-hour-long television shows. No audience, made for television. They're kind of a combination education and exposure. The idea is to continue to grow our music-loving public. There are 3 issues: little education, exposure, and cost. It's expensive to go to concerts. If you do it on public television, everyone has a television set, it's free. Music education, even though that's what you are all involved with, there are many places that don't have enough. And not that I can replace or expect to replace anything that anyone's doing, but I can reinforce it. So a little education, musical examples, rehearsal footage of the orchestra, interviews with the players. There's a back end, which will be very intense, including a director's cut kind of thing where I talk about what I'm doing while I'm conducting. And everything is going to be for free. Everything's downloadable for free. We're creating teachers' guides, which are downloadable for free. The idea is to make it available as a resource for music educators. And in the case where there aren't music educators in some communities, even a science teacher or a math teacher, or not even, a science teacher or English teacher could take that material and be able to teach a little bit about music. And that's my big push. But the interesting thing about it is that's why I'm doing 8 of them. They're 8-hour-long shows, and it's every year. So, you know, in a few years, in 2 years, you have 16 major pieces you're doing. You think about that. And on every program will be one of these short American works. So it'll be, you know, Beethoven Fifth and Chen Yi, or it'll be, you know, the Shostakovich Fifth and Bright Shang, or Richard Danielpour, or whatever. So that's the big push, and I'm working really, really hard on that.
Writing a composition for a concert band, or will you be?
You know, what's interesting about that is after hearing the concert yesterday, that's where my mind was. I will do something with that. I'm going to talk to Tim about it. I was just so thrilled with that concert, realizing what the possibilities are for color and imagination, and of course the tremendous level of performance. And as Tim told me, it's not only central, it's everything that's been going on here. The level is just extraordinary. So that's something I'm going to do soon. I know at Cornell they asked me to do something, but at some point I'll hopefully very soon. I have a number of big pieces to write now, so it's you know what it's like for those of you that compose. It's all encompassing, and so anyway, that's my direction. Hey, Joe. No, I stopped playing the trumpet when I was 30, and I'm 63. So I haven't played for 33 years. But I do play my records, and I do enjoy them a lot. You know, the great thing about having stopped playing, it's like you died, you know? And so that is all, oh, wasn't he great? I mean, you know, I had some bad nights too, like everyone else. Wasn't he great? It's the same thing about leaving the symphony now. After all these years, you can look back on what I've accomplished rather than wonder about what's going to happen next. And so you look back, actually, it's kind of, even on the forward-looking person, it's fun to look back. And those days are very important to me. And even though it was a long time ago, I still dream about playing. Between the East and the West and the Midwest?
New York just will not have us.
Yeah. You know, I think, for me, the difference between the coasts, it's not a coastal thing. It is a city thing. Every city is different. To have a great university like this one, with a great wind ensemble like this one, or at UPS, or at Central, or at Western here in our state, is great. In New York City, we don't think about what kind of band does NYU have, or Columbia have, or the other schools that are in the city. We don't worry about whether whether someone's going to be honored, because we figure everyone's going to do that. You know, William Schumann was 100. We're sure everybody was playing William Schumann in New York. Out here, the only difference is the size of the city. If we don't play William Schumann last year, he probably won't be played. In fact, if we don't play Tchaikovsky, it's possible that Tchaikovsky won't even be played in Seattle, Tchaikovsky Symphony. So I think the big difference between coasts isn't so much the coast as the size of the cities. When I was in LA for 8 years, it was a whole different experience. And every city has its own identity and its own place. I mean, if you look at a place, pick a city, a place like Houston. You know, you think Houston. Sir John Barbaroli was music director in Houston. Leopold Stokowski was music director in Houston. You know, the tradition in Texas for bands and concert bands is phenomenal. What goes on in Austin is phenomenal. I mean, you can just go through that. I think the thing about the Northwest is it really is a gorgeous place. and it's a great place to live. It's a great people here, great companies here. But I didn't come here for any of those reasons. I came here because of the orchestra. When I came here, it wasn't that good, but I felt a lot of potential. And the board wanted it to be great. Now, you'd think that would be the natural thing, but it's not the natural thing. A lot of people don't want greatness. They'd rather have it be easy. Greatness is hard. You want to be mediocre, it's a lot easier. If you want to be outstanding, then, you know, you'll be criticized, you'll have to work harder, push harder. I mean, sometimes you see in orchestras, the players don't want the best possible player because it's daunting because they have to live up to that level. So so we came here because everybody was on the same page. They really wanted to create something that was significant and important, and hopefully we've done that. One more? We have time for one more?
Yesterday, in the master class, we could hear you in the microphone, we could hear you using your hair to breathe and blow. And have you always approached phrasing that way? And how do you think it might differ from the orchestral maestros who are piano players?
Yeah, the breathing part, I apologize for that. I noticed that too. I said, oh God, I'm doing that again. I'm a big breathing person. And, you know, Toscanini used to hum along out of tune and with all the wrong notes, and so did Glenn Gould for that matter. And I do a lot of breathing, and so I've had to actually try to reduce it as much as possible because you could actually, on occasion, hear it in the audience. So I don't think you can hear it anymore. But when I was mic'd, I said, oh, God, what am I doing? But I do, you know, it's the way I release energy. It's the way I phrase. It's the way I do things. So I can't eliminate it completely, even though I probably would be better off if I did. Thank you all so much. And thank you for being here in Seattle. Thank you for doing what you do in your communities. I really appreciate it. Thank you all.